Hey everybody, welcome to Move to Combat. I'm James, and here are your hosts, Haley.
Hey, what's up, you guys?
And Kenny.
What's going on?
What are we talking about today, Haley?
So today we're going to be discussing the state of the standard meta. We're about 3 weeks into it, so we're starting to get some sort of definition of where things are headed. And we're going to discuss that today, what decks we're seeing, what decks we think we're going to see, and what we think about them.
Yeah, disclaimer, the meta is still only 3 weeks old. It's also super duper wide. You can kind of get away with whatever jank you want to play. There's cards that support it in some way or another.
So you might see quite a bit of variance.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be talking about the different tier lists. We have it kind of broken down into what the tiers are starting to shape into. Keep in mind that these are based off of the top 8 deck lists from the Richmond City, or the Star City Richmond Classic, the Star City Richmond Open, and the Standard MCQ.
Yep.
So those are like the 3 major tournaments that have happened so far, and that's primarily what we're basing this information off of. So we have like a tier 1-ish, a tier 1.5-ish, and then like a tier 2-ish right now.
And it's based off the top 8, but it's a pretty good guess to assume that the decks that are making it into the top 8 of these large tournaments are usually appearing in either large numbers, or they're just so variant that no one's prepared to deal with it.
Correct.
So that's usually a pretty safe assumption.
Yeah. So starting with tier 1. No, go back.
Oh.
We're gonna be going over mono red, the 2 different types, aggro, and then the list running some number of Chandra. I believe it was Chandra Fire Artisan. Yes, that one. There are so many. Esper Control, which has been around for the last couple months. Esper Hero, which has also been around for the last couple months, but they both saw a couple new things enter into the decks that we're going to be talking about. Azorius Aggro, which is mono white aggro that's including blue for some cool techie stuff out of the board. And then Grixis 8 Bolus or Grixis Control. There's Grixis Control with all of the boluses.
And then all of the boluses.
Yeah.
All of them.
All of them. Always.
And then you kind of move into the tier 1.5, which are lists that still saw quite predominantly in the top 8 lists. You have Bant Flash, you've got Damir Control, which primarily revolves around Kefnet. You have Naya Feather, or which I've seen a couple times recently, and it looks like a lot of fun. Martyr Aristocrats, which has just gotten better. Fanta Nexus, which has just irritated us all even more. Celestia Tokens, and Is It Drake's is still around to play.
Haley has a vendetta against Nexus decks.
We'll talk about that later.
Okay, and then tier 2 is usually you're gonna find some of the jank, basically. Just the decks that aren't super meta, but they're the tier 2 is open to a whole bunch of different deck types. The one specifically we're gonna be going over is Mono Blue Tempo, Gruul Aggro, and Sultai Midrange. And Gruul Aggro Mono Blue Tempo is the mono blue list that we've seen since Ravnica Allegiance.
Yes.
Gruul Aggro is the Spellbreakers and all of the efficient green creatures and raid creatures, and then Sultai Midrange is the Explore package with blue stapled into it for stuff like Hydroid Crisis.
See, I would almost argue that the tier 2 lists, I wouldn't necessarily call them jank. They are more of like lists that are still impacting these events enough to see. We're just not currently seeing them in the top 8, but they still have a big enough presence that we think they're worth mentioning.
Yeah, especially these 3 decks because they're kind of holdovers from the last meta. And they were fairly tuned and doing fairly well in those metas. So we're gonna see they're either gonna rise or they're gonna kind of stay where they're at. Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna jump into the mono red lists. We're gonna talk about in these lists which decks are the consistent, or which cards are the consistent staples in these decks, and then what are the variances that we're seeing. So with just straight mono red aggro, you're seeing typically 3 to 4 Fanatical Firebrands, which are like the guaranteed.
It's the monkey.
They're 1/1 hasty. He's the monkey guy, and he deals the damage. So obviously he's very good. Move into.
No one ever wants to see turn 1 monkey.
Yeah, turn 1 monkey's bad. You can hit them for damage before they even play a land for turn, which is not nice. It's really not nice. Then you've got typical 3 to 4 get 2 lava runners. It's the 1-drop 1/2, and he says as long as there are 2 or more instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard, he gets +1/+0 in haste. In a mono red deck, it's pretty obvious to see why this is incredibly impactful, because you are slinging a lot of spells, so he's potentially coming out as a 2/2 haster for 1 mana. You move into the Viashino Pyromancer. I think we typically saw these as a 2 or 3 of. It's a 2-drop 2/1. When he enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to target player or planeswalker. That's incredibly important. He's a pseudo burn spell, or he's, he does what you need him to do.
He also hits planeswalkers, which is kind of nice.
Yes, very nice. And then you see your Goblin Chain Rulers, which is 3 mana, 3/3. First strike, when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. They're also hitting planeswalkers, which makes them incredibly efficient and good.
Mono red does seem really well positioned to deal with 36 plus planeswalkers that were kind of injected into the meta.
They are incredibly, yes, incredibly so. You've seen planeswalkers inserted everywhere, so anything that can hit either any target or specifically can hit planeswalkers additionally are good additions to your deck. So these are your staple 1, 2, and 3 drops in the creatures. They do what they've always done. They run super efficiently. There's nothing from the new set in these creatures, so this is kind of the same shell that we've seen this whole time. And then additionally, when you go into the spells...
Next.
Yes. When you go to the spells, you see predominantly Light Up the Stage and Skewer the Critics, because they can be cast for their spectacle cost, and you're mono red, so you're getting in for a ton of damage. Between the mono red aggro and the mono red Chandra list, the numbers of these that you see vary a little bit. But typically, playing a 1 mana, exile the top 2 cards of your library, and until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards, or a 1 mana, deal 3 damage to any target, is incredibly good for what mono red is trying to do.
Yeah, card draw and burn.
Card draw and burn is what you want to do. In addition, you've got the Wizard's Lightnings, which cost 2 less to cast if you control a wizard, which is part of the reason why you see things of the wizard subtype in the creature list.
So Lava Runner and
Lava Runner and Viashino Pyromancer. Yeah. And then it's effectively a Lightning Strike for 1 mana, deals 3 damage to any target. Then you also have your Lightning Strikes, which deal 3 damage to any target. And then your Shocks, your 1 mana, 2 damage to any target. So once again, these are dealing damage to any target, whether it be player, creature, or planeswalker.
Yeah.
The planeswalkers are starting to become a problem, so it's incredibly important to be able to hit them, as well as Skewer the Critics hits them as well. And then the Tybalts, you see them in every deck in some capacity, but it's predominantly in the sideboard, I'd say. So his static ability that your opponents can't gain life gain is the bane of the existence of the mono red decks. Yeah. And he gets you creature advantage. So
just so happens that Esper Control can gain all of the life all the time.
And Tybalt says, actually, no, they can't. So he's incredibly efficient, especially in the 3-drop slot. He's not really hurting anything too bad in a deck where you're playing mostly 1 and 2 drops. So he's just a really good piece to have. Like I said, he's predominantly in the sideboard, though, so we'll have to see if he moves into the main board at all.
Yeah.
Speaking to the variances in the deck, though, depending on which version of the deck of mono red you saw, there was some variances in creature base and also in the whether or not they run Experimental Frenzy or some of the instants and sorceries they play. Runaway Steamkin, he was either being him played or Legion Warboss being played. It depends on what kind of shell you're running. If you're running a more predominantly burn shell, you're probably running the Runaway Steamkin because it's a 2-drop 1/1, and every time you cast a red spell, he gets a +1/+1 counter. If you remove 3 of those counters, he adds 3 mana. 3 red mana specifically, so that's just more to feed into your burn. Whereas if you're playing predominantly like heavier into the creature aggro, like the aggro creature aspect of it, then some of them are running Legion Warboss because he's a 2/2 with Mentor, and at the beginning of combat you're making a 1/1 red Goblin token, and that token gains haste, so it's just another dude that you can buff up and swing with.
Yeah.
Always. In addition, you also see the lava coils. They've been in every deck. The variance in them is people haven't really decided if they want to put them in the main board or the sideboard yet. And I think that, once again, plays to what kind of shell you're running.
Probably also to how much Phoenix and cards like that we're going to be seeing.
Yeah, one thing I did notice is a lot of these lists were not running Phoenix main board, so that's probably a reason you see Lava Coils run to the sideboard, because that was what made them huge, was the fact that they could exile the Phoenixes, so the Phoenixes could not come back. So you see, starting to see Lava Coil move into the sideboard, but additionally we do have them in the main board. And then Risk Factor.
It's one of my favorite cards. It's so cool.
Risk Factor is really good. Once again, Risk Factor, it's a 3-drop. Target opponent may have Risk Factor deal 4 damage to them, and if they don't, you get to draw 3 cards and has Jumpstart, so you can cast it twice. Card advantage is really good in red decks, but additionally, so you didn't see Risk Factor played in the decks that you saw Experimental Frenzy played. Experimental Frenzy is an enchantment that says you can look at the top card of your library, you can play the top card of your library, but you can't play cards from your hand, and you can pay 4 to destroy it. So decks that were running Experimental Frenzy weren't running Risk Factor, kind of for an obvious reason, but also not that obvious of a reason if you don't play with the cards. Risk Factor draws you cards, draws you lots of cards. Experimental Frenzy doesn't allow you to play cards from your hand. So they might not be so great in combination.
Yeah.
But Risk Factor does deal damage if you don't get to draw cards, so it's still good. But if you have Experimental Frenzy on the board, they're probably just going to let you draw the 3 cards and then there are 3 dead cards in your hand. So it's understandable that you see the variances there.
Yeah, which is why Light Up the Stage is so good in combination with like Experimental Frenzy, is because it exiles the spells and then you play them from exile instead of your hand.
Correct.
Which is important.
Yeah, because then it's extending your hand even if you have an Experimental Frenzy on the board, which is kind of nice. And then you're moving on to the Chandra deck. The prominent difference in this deck is you are in fact running Chandra Fire Artisan. She is a 4-drop planeswalker for 4 loyalty. Her static ability says whenever 1 or more loyalty counters are removed from her, she deals that much damage to target opponent or planeswalker. Her +1 says you get to exile the top card of your library, and you may play it this turn. And her -7 exiles the top 7 cards of your library, and you may play them this turn. So she's constant
card draw.
advantage.
Yeah, she's card draw.
So if you are running Experimental Frenzy, she's not bad because she's exiling the cards. It's once again extending the hand that you can play with. Mm-hmm. Additionally, she is burn.
Yeah.
So if you attack her, she's dealing damage to you. That -7, that's dealing 7 damage to a planeswalker or an opponent, which is an insane amount of damage when you're talking just like a one-off.
Divided as you choose, I believe. No, it's all.
No, it's just she deals that much damage. It's one instance of dealing damage. So that's 7 damage you're dealing to something. That could be the difference between you winning and losing a game.
Yeah.
So the reason you see that, so when they're running Chandra, typically you see them running no risk factors. And in order to put these Chandras in the main board, you see them shaving stuff like Skewer the Critics and Wizard's Lightning. She gives them the consistent card advantage, and she also is burn. So you don't have to rely on the risk factors as much to be able to draw cards because she is extending your hand. And then she provides some burn, so they can afford to cut some of the less efficient spells, like Wizard's Lightning, because if you don't have a wizard, obviously it's going to be a 3-mana Lightning Strike. So she kind of mitigates that damage in there a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the, you see like 3 or 4 of her, I think, in the main board.
Yeah, I think it's split between the main and the sideboard.
Yeah, she's some decks are just running straight 4 up in the main board. Some of them are running 2 to 3 in the main and then 1 to 2 in the side. Time will tell. I personally am kind of a fan of her being in there. So.
Yeah. If we do see more of Chandra, I would suggest you put in those Sorcerer Spyglasses in your board because they make her sad.
Yes. Sorcerer Spyglass makes Chandra very sad. So, moving on to Esper Control.
Yeah. So Esper Control it's a Teferi Hero of Dominaria deck. The shells aren't really super definite. But usually you're going to see like Search of Viscanta, Teferi of Hero Dominaria, Caius Wrath, and then Thought Erasure. It's not so much reliant on instant speed removal as it is on just removal. There are some there's a lot of variances in the removal package. It just depends on what the control player is expecting to see. So we should get to that. Usually it's some combination of spot removal, card draw, and counter spells. Stuff like Absorb, which counters a spell, gains you 3 life. It's great against Burn. Makes Burn really sad. Dovin's Veto is just an uncounterable counter spell that uncounterable negate specifically. It hits non-creature spells. Chemist's Insight is like 2 instances of drawing 2 cards. Vraska's Contempt and Mortify are both spot removal. Mortify hits are enchantments or creatures, and then Vraska's Contempt hits creatures or planeswalkers. Vraska's Contempt does exile and also gain you life. So she's great against stuff like Phoenix and all of the planeswalkers that we're seeing.
Yeah, it's these 5 spells in particular we noticed were pretty consistent in the list.
Yeah.
Numbers, once again, all variant in this aspect because Esper Control is a pretty wide deck, but these ones seem to make the cut every time.
Yeah, in some number. But then there's the other spells that War of the Spark added other than Dovin's Veto, and those are kind of being experimented with. And usually it's either the player's either choosing to lean into like a semi-Super Friends package with stuff like Oath of Kaya, which is kind of a removal spell in its own right because it deals 3 and then you gain 3 when it enters play, and then whenever a player attacks a planeswalker you control, it deals 2 and you gain 2. So it's great against, again, like mono red decks because it blows up, I think, every creature they have.
For the most part, yeah.
And then Liliana wins games by herself. She generates a board and then draws you cards, and then she removes stuff. Teferi Time Raveler shuts down other control decks, and Narset stops other players from drawing extra cards. And then she kind of has a semi search for Iskanta ability with her -2, where she looks at the top 4 cards. It's called an impulse, where you look at the top 4 cards, you pick a card from among them and put it into your hand. But she is specifically non-creature, non-land spells.
I think Narset gives you an advantage in the mirror match too, so I think that's why some are playing her in the main as opposed to just in the sideboard.
Yeah, both Narset and Teferi do.
Yes, they give you quite advantage in the mirror match, so if you expect to come up a lot of mirror matches, probably worth playing them in the main board.
Or at least trying, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other way you can go is kind of leaning into the removal. Like D-Spark and Tyrant Scorn both came out with War of the Spark. D-Spark exiles a permanent with CMC 4 or greater, so all of those big spells, your Teferi Hero of Dominarias, your Lilianas, your Nico Bolas, Dragon Gods, everything that is kind of really bomby in like mid-range decks and control decks. And Tyrant Scorn is great against small, fast aggro decks because it hits basically everything they play by destroying a creature with CMC or convert a mana cost 3 or less, or just bouncing the creature that it can't destroy. Cry of Carnarium is seeing way more play.
Oh, yeah.
Just -2 to all creatures, and then all creatures that would die that turn exile instead, which is fantastic against all of the aggro decks that are running around. Cast Down is just destroy target non-legendary creature, and Moment of Craving is usually seen as a sideboard against mono red because it gains you 2 life. But it is -2 to a creature, so it's great against mono white too because they run lots of Adonal Vanguards, creatures that can make themselves indestructible somehow.
Right. I think Cry of the Carnarium is starting to see a lot more play because we are seeing the shift in the meta where, like, Martyr Aristocrats is becoming a bigger deck than it was before.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Cry of the Carnarium helps mitigate a lot of that because it just straight exiles, so you're not getting any of your death triggers anymore from the Aristocrat stuff. Additionally, mono red is still running rampant, so anything that is getting rid of these little guys is super helpful.
Arclight Phoenix decks are seeing a bit more popularity, so it just gets them away forever.
Right.
Which is great. And then I think we're moving on to Esper Hero.
Yes, the Esper Hero deck is not too unsimilar from the Esper Control deck. You just see more of a creature base. I'd say it's probably running more into mid-range now.
I'd say it's a creature control deck versus a spells control deck.
Right. So you're using it's still somewhat control-y, obviously. You're in the best control colors in the game in Esper. So you still have the control there, but it's focusing more on a creature control as opposed to just spell-based control. So you're still doing stuff, and it's fun. Additionally, so you see Teferi, Hero of Dominaria in this deck as well, because if you're playing blue-white, why wouldn't you play Teferi, Hero of Dominaria in some capacity?
We will get to that conversation in a second.
Of course we will. And then for Super Friends as well, so they run Liliana Dreadhorde General, because once again she is creature advantage, she is removal, and she's a potential win con.
Also lets you draw cards when your hero tokens die.
Yes, so when you're not sacrificing
when they die.
little dudes, but when your little dudes die, you're gaining constant advantage off of them. You have Little Teferi, the Time Raveler, because he helps mitigate some of the damage against other opponents, because they can only cast their opponents can cast spells only at a time that they could cast sorcery.
Yeah.
So that's incredibly advantageous to you. They're not be able to use instant speed, like say removal against you. And then in the creature category, you're starting to see some.
Oh, sorry.
The Elite Guard Mages is a 4-drop, 2/3 flyer. When he enters the battlefield, to gain 3 life and draw a card. Once again, card advantage.
Yeah.
Life advantage is the bane of little decks.
Kind of the opposite of Basilica Bellhaunt.
Kind of, yeah.
It's easier to cast, and you gain life.
Much easier to cast.
Get a card instead of making your opponent discard a card.
Correct. Which is nice, because, I mean, it makes sense in the blue and white versus black and white. And then, why we call it Esper Hero, you've got the Hero of Precinct 1, the true drop 2/2. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, you create a 1/1 white human creature token. So it gives you that extra creature advantage, because predominantly you'd like to be casting multicolor spells in this deck.
It's a gold deck.
Yeah. So to round out the creatures, you also see a lot of Thief of Sanities, which are incredibly good cards. I feel like not everybody is valuing them at what they should be. I don't think everybody understands completely how this card works.
If you get in with Thief of Sanity like once or twice, you're kind of positioning yourself so far ahead of your opponent that you can probably just win the game from there.
Yes, Thief of Sanity is a 2/2 flyer. When he deals combat damage to a player, you get to look at the top 3 cards of that player's library, exile one of them face down, and then put the rest of them into their graveyard. And for as long as that card remains exiled, you may look at it, you may cast it, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. So that's ripping a spell off of your opponent's deck. That's extending your hand, but additionally, if Thief of Sanity dies, it doesn't matter. If that card is still exiled, you can still cast it, and you can still cast it as though your mana were mana of any color. Mm-hmm. So he's incredibly good and efficient, and he's evasive. But once again, he's still just a little dude.
He is a 2/2, so he dies to everything.
Yes. And then in rounding out the spells category, so you've got Thought Erasures, which if you're playing blue-black, you should be playing Thought Erasure at the very least in your sideboard, I think. Target opponent reveals their hand, and you choose a non-land card from it, and that player discards that card, and then you get to surveil one. You also see Mortifies and Tyrant Scorns, because creature removal, everybody needs it.
I'm really happy with Tyrant Scorn. It's such a good card.
Yeah, I've seen Tyrant Scorn in a lot of lists, and I think it's going to be one of the huge winners for More of the Spark.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, just a little. So then I think moving into the variances in the decks, the main variance between the decks is the Sorin Vengeful Bloodlord. He changes the shell of the deck, I almost want to say a little bit.
It's like you have to lean more into a creature base for Sorin.
Right, so the main Sorin is able to bring back things, and you lean into a more Super Friends approach when you play him, or at least that's a lot of what we saw, is people are starting to lean into that Super Friends approach, because why wouldn't you? Because we just got 36 walkers into the system. So obviously everybody's going to want to play Planeswalkers. Sorin says as long as it's your turn, creatures and planeswalkers you control have lifelink. That is incredibly efficient with all your little guys getting in there. It makes yourself less susceptible to aggro decks because you are gaining all that life. His +2 ability says he deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker, and his -X can return target creature card with converted mana cost of X from your graveyard to the battlefield. And it's also a vampire.
I'm a big fan of Soren. I've been playing him a lot.
Yeah, he's constantly recurring all of your little dudes that are dying. Another variance that we saw is Deputy of Detention and Hostage Taker, and these two were kind of interchangeable for each other. So if they were playing Deputy of Detention, they weren't playing Hostage Taker. If they were playing Hostage Taker, they weren't playing Deputy of Detention. Deputy of Detention is a 3-drop 1/3. When he enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls and all other non-land permanents that player controls with the same name as that permanent until he leaves the field. Hostage Taker is a 2/3. For 4, he says, when he enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature until he leaves the battlefield, and you may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you can spend your mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. And I think that's just a matter of personal preference between Hostage Taker and Deputy of Detention. Obviously, if they're playing like a bunch of little token dudes, Deputy of Detention's probably a little bit better, because you just name one.
I think Hostage Taker's better in mid-range matchups than Deputy is, because mid-range you're only going to see like 2 or 3 creatures on your opponent's side of the board most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Hostage Taker or Deputy is great against control and aggro.
Correct. Deputy of Detention exiles any Nardland permanent too, whereas Hostage Taker can only do artifacts or creatures.
Yep.
But the upside to Hostage Taker is you can potentially cast that. So like, wow, that's a nice, really big threat that you have on the board. It's mine now.
I like taking Immortal Suns with it.
Yeah, that could be fun. That could be a lot of fun. But yeah, so I think it's just a matter of personal preference when you're discussing which one you'd rather play. Other variances that you see in the Esper Hero deck is when you get into more of like the, I'll call it the Walker package with Soren. So for example, those see a lot of Oath of Kaya and Despark play. Once again, Despark is just the 2-drop exile target permanent with converted mana cost 4 or greater. It's really good against the really big threats. Oath of Kaya is just really good with the planeswalkers. She can do different things. She deals damage for you. She deals 3 damage to any target. She also additionally gains you life, and gaining life is kind of what this deck wants to do.
A little bit, yeah.
And then, additionally, Vraska's Contempt and Discovery Dispersal. These two also were in the decks with less walkers. So if they weren't playing Soren, they were typically playing the Discovery Dispersal and Vraska's Contempt. Vraska's Contempt exiles any creature or planeswalker and you gain life. That's great. And then Discovery Dispersal, Discovery surveils 2 and then draws a card. So that's card advantage for you. You're sifting through your deck more. And then Dispersal for 5 mana. Each opponent returns a non-land permanent they control with the highest converted mana cost among permanents they control to their hand, then discards a card. This can be useful later in the game if people's hands are starting to dwindle down and they've got huge threats on the field. Well, now they have to go back to their hand, and then if that's the only card in their hand, they have to discard it. So it's a potential way to get rid of threats.
Yeah.
And that pretty much sums up how Esper Hero's looking right now.
Yeah, I think the biggest boogeymen that we're finding are like the Esper Control, the Mono Red, Esper Hero.
Yeah.
Those are the decks that are putting up results. So if you're consistently, and if you're going to an event, you're probably going to see at least one of them.
Yeah, I would say so. I probably more when you go to Mono Red Aggro, I'd say you're probably going to see like 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah.
Just because Mono Red is Mono Red. Mono Red's always been Mono Red. It will always be there. It's
pretty cheap to build, and it's a fairly linear game plan most of the time.
But yeah, I would also definitely plan on seeing Esper Control or Esper Hero. And then additionally, these next 2 decks that we're going to talk about are starting to see more play. Yeah. So I would probably count on seeing these as well.
And they're both pretty interesting.
They're both pretty interesting, so why don't you tell us about Ori Sagar?
Okay, so Ori Sagar is just kind of a derivative of Mono White Aggro. They're just including blue for a couple of spicy things, either in the main board or in the sideboard. So the shell is mostly the same. It's Legion's Landing, History of Benalia, Adana Vanguard, Banished Marshal. Quick, efficient creatures that come down and get really, really big really, really quickly. Legion's Landing puts a 1/1 white light. It's an enchantment that puts a 1/1 white lifelinker into play, and then if you attack with 3 more creatures, it flips into a land that you can pay 3 mana to create a 1/1 white lifelinker. History of Benalia puts you get 2 turns of 2/2 of the enchantment, creating a 2/2 white knight with vigilance, and then it pumps all of your knights, and you're running more than just the knights created with History of Benalia. Adana Vanguard is just a really durable 2-drop. Like, you just need to pay 4 life, and it gets indestructible until end of turn. So if they're not running black, then it's probably sticking around. It also attacks as a 3/1 instead of a 1/1, which is insane. And then Benelish Marshal is kind of a payoff for being super into white. It gives all of your creatures +1/+1, and it's a knight for the pump for History of Benalia, and it's a 3/3, which is super efficient for the cost. So there's more we got to go over, but this is kind of the low end of what we're looking at in mono white.
Yeah. This is a lot of like your dudes making more dudes making dudes bigger.
Yeah. Just white
all the
weenies
fun
go.
stuff. Yay.
Yeah. Get the snowball rolling. There's also some like quality of life improvements that mono white got, like Law Rune Enforcer, which taps anything bigger than a 1-drop for 1 mana. So it can lock down your Thief of Sanities, your Nico Boluses, your Niv Mizzets, anything like that the creatures in the air that you have, which aren't many, don't measure up to. But it's still running like Dauntless Bodyguard, which when it enters, you just give a creature indestructible, and then you can... it targets a creature when it enters, and then you can sacrifice Dauntless Bodyguard to give that creature indestructible as long as Dauntless Bodyguard's in play. Sky Marcher Aspirant is just a flyer as long as you have Ascend. And then Venerated Loxodon convokes, and then puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature you use to convoke it. So you tap creatures to pay for its cost, and then they all get bigger.
Yay.
Which lets you kind of cheat the really large CMC of it being like a 5-drop. It's usually down like turn 3.
Yeah, usually you see it down like turn 3.
It's kind of silly.
Primarily. Silly, I think you mean stupid.
It's aggressive, yeah.
Yeah. So those are a lot of your little aggressive guys in white.
Yeah. The big changes we are seeing is some number of Gideon Blackblade and Teferi Time Raveler. So Gideon's really cool because he's a 3-mana 4/4, which is above curve. He's also indestructible and can't take damage while he's a creature. And then his +1 gives a creature you control Vigilance, Lifelink, or indestructible until end of turn, which is insane. And then if you happen to get him to -6, he just exiles target non-land permanent, which is really good. So it's just like 2 turns of him pumping up another creature you control, and then he just exiles something. Teferi kind of shuts down Control's reactionary tactics against you, so they have to kind of rely on sorcery, speed removal, and sweepers. Because he again, we've gone over him. He was in the last 2 decks.
Teferi Time Raveler to clarify.
Time Raveler, yeah. Sorry.
Not Hero of Dominator.
Not Hero. No, this is the blue-white deck that does not run Hero because they don't want a 5-drop that draws them more cards. But it also returns a permanent to its owner's hand, so if there's anything that you're having trouble dealing with, you can just bounce it. Tomic is interesting because it shuts down lands and in graveyards. It's also a 2/3 flyer for 2. So if you're looking for just a meaty flyer in the air, he's a really good option.
Yeah, he's not a bad value, the 2-drop 2/3 flyer. I don't know why you wouldn't play Gideon, I don't think, in this deck.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, he is a creature, and then you can make another creature either have Vigilance, Lifelink, or Indestructible, which is incredibly
it's a lot
conducive
of value,
to what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
It's incredibly valuable.
And a 4/4 at 3 mana.
Yeah, 4/4 at 3
Without
mana.
you having to invest an activation of a Planeswalker ability for it is a lot.
Mm-hmm. Just to have that be the static ability is pretty good.
Yeah. Other than that, normally the sideboard is you're going to see a lot of counter spells, Dovin's Veto, stuff like that in the sideboard.
Yeah. And then some of the additional variances in it
Yeah.
play into it as well.
It's mostly like whether you're expecting to come up against control or aggro. Like Conclave Tribunal and Tithe Taker are great against control. Tithe Taker makes spells cast by your opponent during your turn cost 1 more. And Conclave Tribunal is just it's a convoke, so you can tap your creatures to pay for it, and then it just exiles target online permanent. Baffling End hits smaller creatures with CMC 3 or less, and those creatures are gone forever. But if they are able to remove the enchantment, they get a 3/3 Trampler. Snowborn Sentry is a 0/3 that becomes a 3/3 when you have 10 or more permanents on the board, which is really easy to do with this deck.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, too, that I think this is one of those decks where people just haven't quite figured out the main shell and the most efficient shell for it yet.
Yeah.
Because even in these variances that we saw, most of them, if they weren't in the main board of some of the decks, you saw them in the sideboard. So these are cards that were consistent across the whole things. The variants really just happen in the main board. So I think this is just a prime example of, this is a deck that people want to play, but they don't quite know how to play it yet.
And this is kind of a holdover from Mono White, which was around during Ravnica Allegiance and Guilds of Ravnica. Thank you. I apologize. But it's just taking that spin with Teferi Time Raveler, which kind of pushes it a little bit further ahead.
Right. I mean, you're seeing primarily the mono white aggro deck, the white weenies, but adding blue for counterspells and Little Teferi.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's still similar to the same shell. I think this is a deck that we're probably still going to see a lot of. It's just they haven't figured out the most efficient way to do it yet.
This is also a really inexpensive deck to build.
Yeah, which is makes it another good, like, Mono Red is incredibly cheap to build, so if I want to get into Standard, where do I get in? This isn't a bad place to start.
This is a little bit more expensive than Mono Red, but because you're buying dual lands as well as playing Mythics in Gideon.
Yeah.
He's like $15-$16, but
should be noted that you don't have to play Gideon.
You don't have to play Gideon. He's just really good. But the game plan and the shell are actually fairly inexpensive.
Yes.
And linear. It's fairly easy, quick to learn this deck. I apologize.
No, you're good, Kenny. Now, moving on to a deck that's not so cost efficient for anybody. One of the lists that we emerged that we definitely thought we would see emerge is the Grixis 8 Bolus list. And in case you weren't clear on what the 8 Bolus means, that means we're running 4 of the new Nico Bolas Dragon Gods and 4 of Nico Bolas the Ravengers for a total of 8 Boluses.
Yeah.
You know what I don't want on the field? 8 Boluses. Because you can potentially have 3
in your hand, or in the deck, or in the game.
I just don't want to see it against me. Now, if I'm playing it, we might have a different story. But you have the potential to have 3 Boluses on the board at once. So you've got Nico Bolas the Ravager when he flips.
Yeah.
From his 4/4 creature self. So then you've got the Planeswalker. You can have Nico Bolas the Ravager himself, and then additionally Nico Bolas Dragon God. So you can have 3 of these guys on the board at once, and that makes me anxious.
It's a lot of value.
Yeah. So as we know, or maybe we don't know, Nico Bolas Dragon God is a 5-mana walker. He is triple black, so he's a little bit difficult to cast. But if you can get him down, he's incredibly useful. He has a static ability that says he has the loyalty abilities of all planeswalkers on the battlefield.
Including your opponents if they have them.
Including your opponents if they have them, so that makes him incredibly useful.
Yeah.
His +1, like his own natural +1, just says you +1, you draw a card. Each opponent exiles a card from their hand or a permanent they control. That's just nasty.
Yeah.
His -3 destroys target creature or planeswalker. And his -8 says each opponent who doesn't control a legendary creature or planeswalker loses a game. That is just a win con.
I do want to bring up this note. This deck's really good at keeping the board clear. So his +1 is usually going to get your opponent either exiling cards out of their hand or their lands.
And exiling lands is not what anybody wants to do. So starting with a spell base, sort of, you see a lot of Bedevils in this deck because it's very good efficient removal. It's 3-drop, instant speed, destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Once again, we're seeing the Cry of the Carnariums just because they're so good against so many aggro decks.
Yeah.
So this keeps the board clear for my 4/4 flyers to just come in and do their thing.
And we're in blue-black, so what are we playing?
And we're in blue-black, so we're playing Thought Erasure! Once again, because I like controlling your hand and what you are and are not able to do.
Or I'm just curious. I
just want to see it so I can make sure you can't do anything against what I'm doing. That'd be nice.
Whenever I play this card on Arena, it's like my first question is, what you playing?
Well, it's actually, sometimes it's your second question, because your first question can be a duress, which is just
yeah.
Your first question is, what you playing? And then your second question is like, okay, I saw you drew a card there, but you also have another card in your hand that I don't like, so I'm going to just go ahead and scoot that out of here.
Yeah,
and
I don't like that one either.
I'm going to get myself a little bit of draw advantage by stacking my next draw, potentially.
Yeah, surveilling the top card.
Yeah, so then other cards that you saw predominantly in the deck, there's 2 very specific versions of this list that we've seen so far, one of them being what we're calling the Star City list, because both of the list that topped 8
They got first and third.
Yeah, they got first and third at the Star City Classic. The lists were exactly the same main board. And then we saw a variant from, I believe it was the MCQ.
Yeah.
That was slightly different. So the cards that were specific to the Star City lists that were different from the other one were Angrath's Rampage. It's a 2-drop, choose one. Target player sacrifices an artifact. They sacrifice a creature or a planeswalker. This is really good to get around the indestructible stuff because it doesn't matter if it's indestructible if I make you sacrifice it. Ritual of Soot, which is a 4-drop, destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less. This is just another really good sweeper against aggro
It's
decks.
also really good against Esper midrange.
Yeah.
Like, really good.
Esper midrange, yeah, 'cause this just hits all of
They
that.
have a lot of 3 toughness creatures that happen to be 3 CMC, so...
Yeah, that's true. So you'll see it hit a lot of those targets. Additionally, they were playing Discovery and Dispersals as well, which is fixing their draw or bouncing stuff up off the field, like the really big threats.
Yeah.
And then another new card, I should say, from War of the Spark that we saw was Enter the God Eternals, which is the 5-drop, blue-black. Enter the God Eternals. It deals 4 damage to target creature, and then you gain life equal to the damage that was dealt that way, and then target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard, and then you can amass 4. That's a lot of text on a card.
That's like 4 different things.
That's a lot of things. So not only are you getting either 4 counters on a creature, on a zombie army creature that you already have, or you're just making a 4/4.
Yeah.
You're milling them for 4.
This actually seems like a 5-for-1. If they don't have any recursion out of their yard.
Yeah, if they don't have any recursion out of the yard, then you're just getting rid of stuff out of their deck, which is nice. That's the point of milling. And then it's removal for something. You're dealing 4 damage to a creature that you don't want to see, and then you're gaining that 4 life. So it's incredibly efficient. Now the other variants we saw on this list, you saw the Tyrant Scorn once again, just because it's more removal. Single target, different stuff. Vraska's Contempts, because exiling is always really good. And then you also saw in this, 2 cards that were interesting. So you got Bedeck and Bedazzle. Bedeck says target creature gets +3/-3 until end of turn, and then Bedazzle destroys a target non-basic land, and it deals 2 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. It's interesting because the Bedeck is removal. For more or less, or potentially if you've got one of your big 4/4 flyers,
makes it a 7/1.
As long as they're tapped out and they don't have a way to deal 1 damage to it, you can just make it swing for 7 in the air.
Well, it is instant, so that if they don't, if they
don't
have any, I'm not blocking. Cool, take 7.
Cool, take 7. And then the Bedazzle, obviously destroying target non-basic land, can be helpful at sometimes. It's starting to become more relevant, I think, in Standard, because we are seeing a bunch of 3-color decks.
There's also stuff like Blast Zone and
the Blast Zone that's come out now.
Yeah, Azcanta and stuff like that.
Yes, so that stuff that'll destroy it, and it's removal in addition to being able to destroy that non-basic land, or just damage. And then they also were playing Carnival Carnage. Carnival deals 1 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and 1 damage to that planeswalker's controller. That's primarily only really good against aggro, I would say, for the most part. Obviously, when you have stuff like they're like, oh, I've got this 4/4 flyer, now it's a 7/1 flyer. That's cool.
Ping.
1 damage to it, it's dead. And then Carnage, I think, which is more primarily...
It's probably the main reason it's used for.
It deals 3 damage to target opponent, and that player discards 2 cards. So it's a lightning strike that also is controlling your hand.
Kind of a blightning, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. So, this version of the deck plays more off of the instance as opposed to the other one, which tends to be just like...
I'm sorry.
Good.
I think this list wasn't keeping... Well, this specific variant wasn't keeping cards like Teferi Time Raveler in mind, which is why the Star City list was playing so many sorceries.
I do believe that is correct, yes. It's a nifty deck. Definitely not easy on the wallet by any means, but it could be fun in the future. I've seen a couple versions of this deck being played so far on Arena, and it's insane to play against sometimes. And then other times, it's not so insane. So I think this is another deck that just still needs time to be fleshed out.
Yeah, it probably just needs a little bit more refining.
Yeah. But then moving on to
Okay.
like the 1 point.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. No, we messed up. I forgot. There's
got
a
a whole
whole nother
bunch of
part of this
stuff.
list. So, in addition, that's right. There's a small Super
The
Friends
MCQ,
package
yeah.
with this. The
The
MCQ.
MCQ list.
Yep, the MCQ list also had a small sort of Planeswalker package in it, in addition to the boluses, with Ugin the Ineffable. He is a 6-drop. Colorless spells cost you 2 less to cast, but his +1 exiles the top card of your library face down. And
He's seen
can
playing a
look
bunch
at
of
it.
stuff.
yes, he is seeing playing a bunch of stuff, but he's good, so why wouldn't he? And then you get to create a 2/2 colorless spirit token. When that token leaves the battlefield, you get to put the exiled card into your hand. So it's creating you a creature and then giving you card draw or card advantage later. And then it was -3, destroys target permanent that's 1 or more colors. Additionally, they're also seeing play of Narset. She's the 3-drop Planeswalker that says each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn, which makes it better against control decks because they want to just draw all of the cards. And then her -2, once again, you're looking at the top 4. You can reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them, put it to your hand, which is incredibly good. It's also seeing play of Augur of Bolas, which is a 2-drop 1/3. It says when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 3 cards of your library. You can reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them, put it to your hand, and put the rest to the bottom in your running order. This plays to a more control-y aspect of the board. Or
It also gives
aspect
you a
of the
1/3
deck.
blocker.
Yes. Gives you a 1/3 blocker. Your boluses can go in the air, and you don't have to worry about getting hit on the ground necessarily. And it also plays to getting the instant or sorcery, so like the more control-y like aspect of it.
Yeah,
and
it's
then
card
Chemist's
selection.
Insight, because who doesn't love drawing 2 cards
Twice.
Now I think we're moving on to the 1.5 tier. Yes.
So, Bant Flash. I am so excited for Bant Flash. It makes me so happy. You don't even know. It's basically leaning on Vivian giving the creature spells you control Flash. She also extends your hand by letting you look at the top 3 cards of your library. You exile 1 face down, and then you put the rest on the bottom. And then for as long as it's exiled, like Thief of Sanity, you may look at that card and you may cast it as if it was, or if it was a creature card. And then she just gives a creature Vigilance and Reach. It also leans off of cards like Oketra, because playing a creature with Flash while Oketra is out is hilarious. And then there's high-impact creatures like Shalai, where if your opponent's going to target something you control, you just Windmill Slam Shalai in their face and tell them no.
Yes. Yes. Because an instant speed, I tell you no, is always good, and that's why people play blue.
From a creature deck.
Yes.
It's great.
That's why people play blue, and you're telling me I can do that in a creature deck now. I'm interested.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, too. So we call these the tier 1.5-ish decks because they still saw a lot of top 8 victories, but they didn't see as many as the first set that we discussed.
I think we can consider these like the new deck types that are going to be appearing once they get fleshed out.
Yeah. Well, most of them anyways.
Most of them.
Yeah, most of them anyways. I think that once we get these fleshed out a little bit more, we'll see them probably move into like the tier 1-ish spots.
Mm-hmm.
Because Vivian, Champion of the Wilds, in the next few decks we're talking about, she pops up a lot.
Yeah, this deck also runs Time Raveler.
It does. It also runs Time Raveler. Because everybody needs a Time Raveler.
Of course. If you're in blue-white, why are you not running it?
You are running it. That's the point of what we just said.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's running it. But it's good that we have these walkers that are seeing play, even like the rare ones.
Yeah.
Because I was a little hesitant about...
Even the uncommon ones.
Even
Cards
the
like
uncommon
Narset
ones,
and Saheeli
yes.
are seeing a lot of play.
You know how hesitant I was about like these new sets of planeswalkers that were coming out, and they're proving themselves, and people are wanting to play them, and that's primarily what I care about.
And it's mostly off of their passives, too.
It is mostly off of their passives. I mean, their passives, a lot of them are really good, though. But pertaining to this deck in particular, Bant Flash, yes, she casts creatures
With flash. At flash speed, yeah.
So then you're getting so much value out of these guys because...
Yeah, and all of these creatures are
coming in at
super
flash
high impact, too.
Yeah.
It's like, I've seen some lists running an Explore package, which is hilarious at flash speed.
Yes,
Or,
just a lot.
Or just generally good flash creatures like Frilled Mystic.
Yeah.
Or good ETB creatures like Deputy of Detention and Knight of Autumn.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I'm gonna play this creature at instant speed because I can. Neener.
Yeah, and especially when you have Oketra out there, it's like, I'm gonna play it at instant speed, and now I have a 4/4. Untap, swing for a ton.
Yeah, Blarg.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah. and with Shalai giving you hexproof and your planeswalkers you control, it makes Vivian into very harder to deal with. This deck's also maybe seeing some Vivian reads.
Potentially. I think she's got a place in the deck for sure.
Just not as like a core piece of it, yeah.
Yeah, I think the Vivian, in this deck in particular, Champion of the Wilds is much more important and impactful because it gives the whole purpose to the deck that you're trying to do. So she's definitely a 4 of in the deck.
Yeah.
Moving on to a deck that I particularly found interesting, Damir Control. The highlight of this deck is basically God Eternal Kefnet.
Yeah.
You're seeing the mono blue control type package with your counters and your draw spells and whatnot, and then you're seeing typically your mono black removal type spells, but you're getting so much more value out of them because God Eternal Kefnet says you can reveal the first card you draw each turn as you draw it, and whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, you get to copy that card, and you may cast that copy, and the copy costs 2 less to cast. So that's like casting, oh, look at this Vraska's Contempt. Now it's cost me double black to cast this Vraska's Contempt on something that you have, and now I have it in my hand for when I need it later, too.
Yeah,
and he's a 4/4 flyer, which just makes him really good.
It's really hard to get rid of.
He is very hard to get rid of. So, and then also in this deck, you're seeing the play of the Liliana Dreadhorde General, because she's giving you a board state to work with in some capacity, and she's also more removable. So she doesn't quite follow the instant, but she does give you that card advantage.
I will say this, for the black control decks, if Liliana hits her -9, it's back-breaking.
Oh, yeah. It's brutal.
Because she hits lands. She makes you sacrifice one of each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type, including lands, and sacrifices the rest. So it leaves you with one of each permanent type, and then your opponent's just like, I don't care, I got a board.
Yeah. So primarily, the main purpose of this deck is just to be able to cast as many spells as many times as you possibly can. And it's functional.
Yeah.
So then we've got Naya Feather.
Naya Feather is so cool. So the main draw that it's Naya is the green-red pump spells. I believe it's Collision Colossus and stuff like Domri's Ambush.
Primarily,
and then red-white creatures like 10th District Legionnaire, which is a 2-drop 2/2 with haste, and whenever it becomes the target of a spell, whenever you cast a spell that it's got heroic, you put a +1/+1 counter on it and scry 1. And then Dreadhorde Arcanist has Trample, which is crazy, and whenever it attacks, you may cast an instant sorcery card with converted mana cost less than or equal to its power, and if you would, exile it. And you don't pay the CMC off of Dreadhorde Arcanist's trigger. So it's all of these cards that kind of profit from you repeatedly casting combat tricks.
Remind
with
us
Feather
what
in play.
Feather does again.
I'm sorry. Feather is kind of the glue. It's a 3 mana, 1 red and double white for a 3/4 flyer. And whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell that targets a creature you control, exile that card instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves. And if you do, return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So your combat tricks come back. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, the TLDR of this deck is you're playing creatures that are reaping the benefits of these instants and sorceries that you just keep recasting.
Yeah, this deck's also running maybe some Krankos, stuff like that in it.
I'm not entirely sure on that. I think I would like to see a few more deck lists before I make that assumption. But I've also seen the Boros version of this deck too, which is also just as good, I think.
Yeah.
But the green pump spells help make it a bit.
Yeah, like your giant growth.
I don't know if it's more efficient, but it definitely gives
stuff
you
like that.
Yeah.
It's super explosive, and if you're not prepared for it, it can just kind of kill you without you even getting a chance to do anything.
Can just ruin your day if you're not being careful.
Yeah, it's woo.
Yeah, it's something. But then we've got the Martyr Aristocrats deck, which has seen play before, but once again, Sorin Vengeful Bloodlord is popping his head in there, and he has made this deck quite a bit better.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think before War of the Spark, it was like a hero deck, and it was using like heroic reinforcements.
Yeah, mostly.
But
That was the most primary build you saw of it.
But there was that weird split because Judith doesn't trigger off of token creatures.
Right, it's only non-token. So I think that this newer version of Martyr Aristocrats that's popping out that we're seeing is much better because you've got Sorin to help recur the stuff that is dying or that you're sacrificing. It does what Aristocrats does. It does everything that it wants to do. So you've got Judith back from older set that she's now getting that full utilization of her abilities because she says other creatures you control get +1/+0, and then whenever a non-token creature you control dies, she deals 1 damage to any target. So you're getting value out of your little guys that are dying. Your little guys are bigger.
One of the awesome part is that all 3 of these cards curve into each other really, really cleanly.
Yeah, they do curve into each other really, really cleanly. So if you go like Cruel Celebrant, which is a card from the new set, which also helps make this deck so much better, is 2-drop 1/2. Whenever it or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, and you can do that curving into a Judith, curving into a Sorin, and then you're just constantly recurring these little guys that are doing all this amount of work. I think it's gonna be a big force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, the one issue that this deck has is the existence of Cry of the Carnarium. Because all of the creatures in this deck have 2 toughness.
But I think this deck is one of the big reasons that we're seeing such a resurgence in Cry of the Carnarium, is because you don't want people getting death triggers, nor do you want them to bring their creatures back.
Yeah.
So that's just helping mitigate all of what Aristocrats is doing.
But all of the value.
All of the value. All of the value, so long as you don't come up against a Cry of the Carnarium. You come up against a Cry of the Carnarium, it's game over. But other than that, this deck seems to be like, it could be very fun, especially since it's no longer, like, the Hero Shell is taken more of to, like, the Esper Hero Shell.
Yeah.
And so now we're actually seeing what, like, Mardu Aristocrats can do.
It doesn't hurt that Cruel Celebrant is like a straight up Blood Artist for 2 mana.
Correct. So, it essentially does the same thing.
It does exactly the same thing. It's just got 1 more point of power, 1 more point of toughness.
Correct. And that is what we need. More things like that.
More that.
That is exactly what Aristocrats needed. War of the Spark gave Aristocrats what it needed, and now we're seeing it as we rightfully should.
Yeah.
So
this deck's a lot of fun to play too.
It's a lot of fun to play. Yes, but moving on.
Yeah, we're gonna be talking about Fanta Nexus. So Fanta Nexus isn't too different. The biggest add is Tamiyo, which is a 4-mana planeswalker. Spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to discard cards or sacrifice permanents, which kind of is a big middle finger to black-blue decks that are running Thought Erasure.
Or Grixis decks that used to run solely off this ability to counteract Nexus of Fate.
Or Grixis decks that are running, like, Angrath's Rampage, because it causes your opponent to sacrifice one of the 3 permanents chosen. Her +1, I believe she comes in with 4 loyalty. 5 loyalty, I apologize. Her +1 is you choose an online card name, and then you reveal the top 4 cards, and if that name, a card with that name appears in them, you put it in your hand, and then the rest into the graveyard. But the reason she's being played is for her -3, which lets you return a card from your graveyard to your hand. So she's an E-Witness.
Yeah.
Which lets you get back your Teferi Hero of Dominarias and your Wilderness Reclamations. Any of the cards that were blown up, you just get back, and it just gives Nexus of Fate decks kind of a new lease on life.
You know, I don't care what you say, a Nexus deck is still a Nexus deck, and it's still just...
Oh, I'm not saying it's not.
I don't care what pretty new shiny things it got, it's still annoying to play. Play whatever you want, as long as it makes you happy. It's just frustrating sometimes when, like, one of their only win cons can be, like, Teferi Hero of Dominaria.
Game 1, yeah.
Game 1. So, it's an interesting deck. I think Tamiyo is an interesting addition to it, and I'm interested to see what it does, but I still don't like having to play against it. That is my opinion.
Fair enough.
Okay, moving on to Celestia Tokens.
Celestia Tokens is, once again, kind of like the same thing with Fanta Nexus. The tokens deck that we've seen surface.
Kind of been sitting in the corner.
It's kind of been sitting in the corner, but it's not something that we haven't seen.
Yeah.
I would say. So obviously you have your Amara and your Tristani, which are just
good.
I make a lot of dudes, and a lot of dudes get bigger. Yay!
Tristani's also great against your Thief of Sanities, your Eldritch Reborns, anything that's taking a creature you control or a permanent you control and playing it on your opponent's side. Because you get it back.
Yeah, because you get it back. So it's like, yeah, when you're playing Thief of Sanity, it doesn't do me any good to steal one of your creatures because you'll just get it right back because that's what I want. It's not what I want. But the main addition to Celestia Tokens is it's now seeing Gideon in play, which is interesting that this would make to me at least, that Gideon himself would just make such a resurgence in this deck happen.
Yeah, I thought it would be like a Johnny.
Potentially, yeah. This, Gideon, he's really good. 4/4 human soldier, indestructible. That's still planeswalker, and giving another target creature you control either vigilance, lifelink, or indestructible. So I guess he does protect like your lords, like Amara or Tristani.
Yeah, during your turn.
Yeah, I do consider Amara a token lord.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, she's definitely a token lord. I know she doesn't. Or I guess a token producer would be a better word for her, but she's one of the main things that makes this deck function. So I guess using Gideon to be able to give her indestructible and be able to sort of help protect them, because obviously they have an instant speed thing and they do it. They do it in response to you making her indestructible. There's nothing you can do about it, but it does help give that little bit of extra protection. And he is a 4/4. 5/5 with Tristani, so that's pretty good. A 3-mana 5/5 is nothing to stick your nose up at.
No, it's really scary, actually.
Yeah, just a little bit. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm not upset that it's making a resurgence. I just find the whole thing very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Our next deck is it Drake's or is it Phoenix? They're kind of interchangeable.
Yeah, kind of.
The big thing that Is It Drake's got, or Is It Phoenix got, was Finale of Promise and Augur of Bolas. Finale of Promise mostly is because it's this huge spell that you get to play when in the late game when you are either out of gas or just like need a little bit of extra push.
Yeah.
What it does is it's double red and X, and it's a sorcery, and you may cast it lets you cast up to one target instant or up to one target sorcery card from your graveyard, each with converted mana cost X or less without paying its mana cost. And if you pay X is 10 or more, you copy each of those spells twice. And you may choose new targets for the copies. So what it does is you pick an instance card and a sorcery card in your graveyard, and then you get to play them if their CMC is equal to X or less. Augur of Bolas kind of digs you into your instants and sorceries a little bit more, so they're leaning less on cards like Enigma Drake and more on their suite of like counter spells and burn spells and draw spells.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things about Finale of Promise, and it's such a good addition to the deck, is now those spells that are already in your graveyard, you're able to use them again, which makes them more efficient. And a lot of like your one creature doesn't care if it's in exile or in your graveyard. You're still getting the Crackling Drake. Yeah, you're still getting the buff bonus off of it. So you don't care if it's in exile, so now you're just getting that much more value out of the spells that you're already playing. And then Augur of Bolas, it's allowing you to sift through your deck when it comes in.
And if you are running Phoenix's Finale of Promise, it counts as one spell, and then the two spells you pick off of it count as spell 2 and 3.
Ew. and that's Arclight Phoenix, not Rekindling Phoenix.
Arclight Phoenix is a 3/2 that says whenever you cast your when you move to combat, if you have cast 3 or more instant sorcery spells in the turn, it comes into play with haste.
I was just snickering about the move to combat.
Yeah.
But so
Finale Promise is a really efficient way to go about that.
It's a very efficient way to go about it. So I think they're good additions to the deck. And then moving into like the tier 2 stuff, which is the stuff that is still seeing play, but it's not quite good enough to see play in the top 8. It needs a little bit more hammering out, etc., etc. Gruul aggro. What Gruul aggro is kind of turned into, at least in the list that we've seen so far, it's still Gruul aggro, so it's still got its little creatures, it's still got like Rhythm of the Wild effects with the Riot and stuff, but it's added a mini Super Friends package that has a Sarkhan payoff, What I mean by that is they've added the Damir Anarch of Bolas, who's the 3-drop, 3 loyalty. Creatures you control get +1/+0. You can +1 him to add red or green to your mana pool, and then cast. And then creature spells that you cast, they can't be countered. And then his -2 says target creatures you control fight, target creature you don't control. So he just adds value to the deck. He's, I think, what people wanted.
I think that's the main driving force actually behind Gruul Aggro is Damir.
Yeah, well, yeah, because it's making it good against control, because you can't counter my creature spells. They're coming out. All of my creatures are buffed. And then, obviously, fight's never a bad mechanic to have. And then, yeah, it does give you mana. We're seeing, once again, Vivien, Champion of the Wilds. She's really good. You can cast these things with Flash. It makes them great. You can give something Vigilance or Reach. Hilarious. Yeah, just a little bit. And then her -2, you can look at the top 3 cards of your library, exile 1 face down, put the rest to the bottom of your library in any order. For as long as it remains exiled, you can cast that card if it's a creature card. So, she's just giving you more value. Being able to pull out more creatures, being able to cast them at flash speed. And then Sarkhan the Masterless, I think he would be primarily being utilized in this deck because of the fact that you've now added a mini Super Friends package, so you can make them all 4/4 flyers. He can make 4/4 flyers himself, and then whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, each dragon you control deals 1 damage to that creature. So any dragon tokens that he makes, or anything that you might play, like any dragons that you might play in the deck, he would. Yeah. Any of the dragons.
Skargan Hellkite is the big one.
Yes, and then you've got even Lathless Dragon Queen has been seeing some play recently, and etc.
In big red deck.
Yeah, and big red deck. So any of those, each one of them is going to be dealing 1 damage. So that's protection for your field. So I think it's going to be interesting if this Super Friends package stays in here like this, because I definitely think Damir is there to stay.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the rest of it, I think it'd be interesting to see as the set evolves if it's going to keep this mini Super Friends package within it.
Yeah, also, if you have Damir out and you have Sarkhan out, those dragons that your planeswalkers are now 5/4s. So you only need 4 of them to kill someone instead of 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they all work together. It's nice.
It is really nice.
And then we've got the Sultai and midrange.
Sultai midrange, yeah. So Sultai midrange, it could be a couple different things, but it's mostly the Green Explorer package. So your Merfolk Branchwalkers, your Jade Light Rangers, and your Wild Growth Walkers, which gain 3 life, and then they get a counter whenever you explore. And it's super snowbally. But we're also seeing cards like Ugin the Ineffable, again, Liliana, Davriel, which at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in their hand, it deals 2 damage to them, and then it's got 3 loyalty and -1s to make target player discard a card. And then Nissa, which kind of acts as a Mirari's Wake in a way. She lets your forest tap for an extra green mana, and then she animates your lands permanently, turning them into 3/3 creatures with vigilance and haste as her +1, and then her -8 gets all of your forests into play. And now they're indestructible forever with the emblem she produces. She starts at 5 mana, or 5 loyalty for 5 mana, and she's done doing a lot of work in a lot of the lower tier decks.
Yes, she really has. Yeah, I think Sultai midrange is going to be something that works. I don't know if it's quite what I wanted out of the Sultai midrange deck. I was particularly excited for it, and what we see is a lot more of the Explore package again, which I'm not against. The Explore package is pretty good and efficient. I just wanted to see something fun, more fun come out of it, I want to say.
Yeah.
But maybe I'll just have to build that deck myself.
There you go.
But I definitely think, once again, we're seeing a Super Friends package go into a deck to make it more efficient, which isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's a very good thing. I like all these Super Friends that we have been getting. And then, you've got the Gruul Explore package with some blue in there for all of the fun stuff like Hydroid Crisis and...
Yeah, the way Nissa plays into Hydroid Crisis is kind of silly, too.
Just a little bit.
Just Nissa, next turn, I'm going to play a Hydroid Crisis for 12.
One thing that I did notice about the Sultai mid-range deck, though, is whereas before it was playing a lot more removal, with the black and blue, is now it's replacing the removal package with more of this Walker's package.
More threats,
so,
yeah.
So it's more threats as opposed to like being able to protect themselves more, which I think is incredibly interesting.
Seems much more like a deal with me deck more than responding to what your opponent does.
Come at me, bro.
Yeah, it's a come at me, bro deck. like most aggro decks, it's just like, I don't care what you're doing, I'm just gonna do this.
Yeah. And then the last deck that we see some play is once again the mono blue tempo deck. Initially, this deck list is pretty much the same as it has been for the last set or two. Primarily in the last set when it was running pretty rampant. But I think it is interesting to note that this mono blue tempo deck is being experimented with a lot, so this isn't something that's coming from necessarily like the big tournaments and like the top 8 stuff, but online people are taking this mono blue tempo deck, which was topping 8 very consistently, and they're doing stuff like adding a Super Friends package to it, for example using Kasmina. The 4-drop Planeswalker, she spells your opponent's cast.
Does produce
that target
wizards.
creature or Planeswalker you control costs 2 more to cast, and then she's also producing wizards for the deck, so she's producing more blue creatures. Ashiok, which is saying spells and abilities your opponent control can't cause their controller to search their library.
Yeah.
So it's taking out some of that aspect.
Shuts down ramp decks too.
Shuts down ramp decks. The ability to just be able to go out and pull stuff out of your deck. And then the -1, her target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyards, then exile its opponent's graveyard. So she's like a mini mill strategy that she's got going on.
Yeah.
And then Dovin is seeing a little bit of play in them too, and he says artifacts, instants, and sorceries your opponent's cast cost 1 more to cast, which is just really good because you've got a deck that's doing little things and you're playing stuff like Spell Pierces, so any mana that you can expend of theirs is just all the better.
Yeah, and then his -1 just lets you bubble a creature, which means they don't deal damage and or bubble a permanent, and they neither deal nor take damage.
Yeah, and in my personal experience as somebody who has played the mono blue tempo deck, I think the deck is still really strong, and it's just going to be interesting to see how the shell is changing, because currently it really hasn't.
No,
so you're seeing the experimentation there.
It's been pretty fixed. Kasmina's really spicy, I think, just because, in my opinion, Wizard's Retort is low-key the best card in that deck.
Probably.
And Wizard's Retort is double blue and 1. It's a cancel unless you control a wizard, which Kasmina produces, which is really cool.
Yep, the wizards work well with some of this other stuff in the deck, and just being able to, when you create that wizard, you get to draw a card, then discard a card. So if you got flooded on lands, it's like, here, let me just draw my answer really quick and get rid of one of these extra lands.
Or if you haven't found the Curious Obsession you want yet, or anything
right,
like
you haven't found your Curious Obsession yet, any of the above. I'm interested to see what experimentations come out of this, because it's a fun deck.
Yeah.
So, now...
let's talk about potential goodies.
Yeah, Kenny and I have some decks that we think have the potential to be fun or really good in the near future, and that we think that we might see more of.
So I really want to try Simic Labman or Sultai Labman for just some hand disruption. Basically, it's Kamal's Druidic Vow with Nissa, because Nissa generates a whole bunch of green mana that you can sink into Kamal's Druidic Vow. And what Druidic Vow does is it's double green and X, and you look at the top X cards of your library, and you may put any number of land and or legendary permanent cards with converted mana cost X or less from among them into the battlefield, and then you put the rest in your graveyard. So it's a gen wave. For legendary permanents, you do have to have a legendary creature or planeswalker in play to cast it, but there's a bunch of those in this deck, so it's fine.
Yeah, I think one thing that is important to note before we continue on with this deck is why we call it Lab Maniac, because Lab Maniac is not a standard card. So if you're not familiar with other formats of Magic, you might not know what Lab Maniac is.
So Lab Maniac is a card that says when you have no cards in your deck, if you would draw a card, you win the game.
Correct. And Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, happens to share that same ability on him, so it makes it possible for it to do in standard right now.
Yeah. But basically, the deck's all about getting, like, Nissa down, ramping into Kamal's Druidic Vow.
Nissa who shakes Kenny's world.
She's really good. Windmill slamming Jace, and then buying Kamal's Druidic Vow back with Tamiyo.
Yeah, it's basically just a constant cycle of like, I'm just gonna cycle through my deck and that's how I'm gonna win. And it's interesting, because we haven't had something like this in Standard in a kind of a long time.
Like
We've
a long time.
had like mill decks where you're milling your other opponent, but then you start milling yourself, and people get real confused for a minute until they realize what you're doing. They're like, why did you just target yourself to mill 12 cards?
It's probably not till like turn 5 or 6 where the light bulb clicks on, and they're like, oh no.
Yeah, and then when you windmill slam that Jace, who is saying if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. In addition, there's +1. The target player puts 2 cards of their library into their graveyard, and they draw a card. So that's 3 cards that you're moving throughout your deck. And then there's -8, says you draw 7 cards, and if your deck library would have no cards in it, you win the game.
And this deck also makes big use of Tamiyo's +1, which gets the top 4 cards off of your library as well.
Correct, because those go into your graveyard, so that's an additional 4 cards that you're just moving out of your deck, and that's all the quicker that you're cycling and sifting through your deck to just
rip
empty
through
it.
all of it.
Yeah. Rip through all of it.
It's just like daring your opponent. It's like, I bet you I can beat you before you kill me.
The next deck, I think I'm gonna let you take the helm on the next deck as well. It's Blue-Red Storm.
Yeah.
Because you are kind of psyched about this.
I am super psyched about this. I know everyone groans when they hear the Railstorm Conduit combo, but it's a lot of fun. So it's basically a counterburn deck that wins just off of playing a whole bunch of copy spells with Railstorm Conduit. Cards like Narcissus Reversal, which is double blue, you copy target instant sorcery spell, then you return it to its owner's hand, and you may choose new targets for the copy. And then Expansion lets you copy target instant sorcery spell with CMC 4 or less. So you could just play like Opt, Narcissus Reversal targeting Opt, and then Expansion, Narcissus Reversal.
Ugh.
And then keep going. Just and then they die.
Storms out.
At instant speed.
Stupid.
It's great. And, like, other than that, you're running, like, Ionizes, you're running all of the counterburn that you'd think you'd be running. It's just really cool.
It's blue-red counterburn with extra effects.
Yes.
And that can be incredibly fun.
And the fact that Railstorm Conduit does scry 1 as his +2 is a big deal.
Yeah.
He just lets you fix the top card of your deck.
Yeah, it's just I mean, a lot of the blue spells do that too, that you would probably typically find in this deck, and so it's just a constant value engine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, like, maybe if you just kind of slide Niv Mizzet in there just for funsies, sure.
Just for funsies. Because that's what Niv Mizzet is. Just for funsies.
Yeah.
And when we say Niv Mizzet, we're not referring to the new Niv Mizzet from War of the Spark that's 5 colors. We're referring to Niv Mizzet Perun?
Yeah,
Parun.
Perrin?
Something
However
like
you
that.
would like to pronounce
the
it.
other
The
one.
Parun trap?
He can't. So Niv Mizzet Perrin, or Parun, or however you pronounce it, I apologize. I'm terrible.
However you would like to pronounce it, you
Yes.
just pronounce it however
Yeah.
makes you happy.
It's a 6 mana, triple blue, triple red, 5/5 flyer that cannot be countered. And whenever an instant or sorcery spell, an opponent plays an instant or sorcery spell, I believe.
Yes, whenever an instant sorcery
Whenever an instant sorcery spell is played, you draw a card. And whenever you draw a card, Niv Mizzet deals 1 damage to any target. So
yeah, it's just another
just
constant
lets you
value
go
engine.
blarg.
That... Yes. For funsies.
Yeah, it's for funsies.
For funsies.
And moving on to the next category of decks, Super Friends. We're already seeing some of it emerge with the decks that currently exist, but I think that there is merit to some sort of Super Friends deck on its own.
Like a dedicated Super
like
Friends
a
deck.
dedicated Super Friends list. And there's several different ones you can see. Probably like some form of an Esper one that runs the Teferis, and Liliana, Ugin, Kaya, Nukarn, Gideon, any combination of those, and the Esper colors, they seem to be pretty strung together. Additionally, you also have a Esper Artifacts Planeswalkers list that you could see that would use like the buy a box Tezzeret, because he gives all creatures and planeswalker spells affinity for artifacts.
That concept seems really interesting to me.
That concept could be has the potential to be like insane, because it's +2. It deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of artifacts you control, and you gain X life. His -3, you get to return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. It's -8. You exile the top 10 cards of your library and put all artifact cards from among them onto the battlefield. You could also run Ugin in this deck. You could Psymaster Thopterist. He is not a planeswalker, but he fits really good into the shell. You can play the Old Dovin. Old Dovin, like, he's really that old. He's, like, from a set ago.
Dovin Grand Arbiter, yeah.
Yeah, Dovin Grand Arbiter.
He makes Thopters.
From a set ago.
And then Saheeli seems to slot really well into that kind of deck as well.
Yeah, Saheeli would slot really well into that kind of deck. So if you were looking for, like, some sort of artifact build, I think we have the potential for, like, an artifact Super Frenzy type thing. And then you could...
Even Old Karn.
Even Old Karn. Yeah, Old Karn would be incredibly good in it, too. And then you've got, like, a potential, like, Jeskai list going on with the Teferis, and then Saheeli. Also Sarkhan, because Sarkhan's good in any Super Friends list that's running red right now, because he just gives you an alternate win condition. You've got Narset, Gideon, Dovin, so there's, like, so many encompassing things that could happen in Super Friends right now, and I think we're gonna see a deck, some sort of deck, any, like, dedicated Super Friends deck evolve into that, in addition to seeing all these additions to the decks that were already being played, or the decks that are emerging, having those Super Friends packages in them.
Yeah. I've been looking at a whole bunch of stuff. I think I want to try Jeskai just because the payoff of Sarkhan seems really fun. Just playing Sarkhan and saying, "Are there all dragons? Now you're dead."
I've got how many planeswalkers on the field? 5 of them. Sarkhan, swing for 20?
Yeah, you're dead now.
I did my math wrong there, but you get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just incredibly, incredibly powerful. And then the last one we have...
Let's talk about Is It Wizards?
Is It Wizards is a deck that we've already seen go through the meta.
Yeah, it's existed for a while.
It's kind of had its moment, but I think we're going to see a resurgence in it again because it's got some good pieces.
Yeah, it's been around since Amonkhet, actually.
On and off, yes.
Yeah, because there was a wizard there that gave your burn spells ended up doing damage and -1/-1 counters. Soulscar Mage. It did... it minus down the creatures instead of actually dealing damage, so you could just, like, shock down a creature over time and it would just die.
Yes.
But with the printing of Dreadhorde Arcanist and cards like Adeliz, the synergy between those cards is kind of absurd.
Adeliz has always been, like, the best wizard lord, but now you're adding, like, Dreadhorde Arcanist, who's a zombie wizard, who just adds that much more value to the deck.
And then cards like Casmino, which produces wizards and draws you cards.
Yeah, she does what Wizards wants to do.
Yeah, and it's basically a really fast Is-It spells deck.
Yeah, I think we have the potential to see a resurgence in an Is-It Wizards, aggro-y, spellslingery type thing. Like I said, though, this is a deck that we've seen for a while, but it just, like... It comes in and it goes, and it comes in and it goes, because it gets pieces that make it really good, and then it has, like, pieces that
immediately loses them.
And then immediately loses them, or it gets the pieces that are really good, and then, like, a really good counter to it is printed, and then you see it die off. But I think we're coming back into, like, you're going to see it happen again because of cards like Casmina and Dreadhorde Arcanist.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of the state of the meta right now.
Yeah, it's super open. Like, really, whatever jank you want to play, you're probably going to do fine.
Yeah.
Just
for sure.
Be aware when building sideboards that, like, Esper Control and Mono Red are really popular decks that are putting up results, and just kind of kit your sideboards towards that.
Yeah. Like I said, too, as we mentioned at the beginning of this video, the meta is currently only 3 weeks old.
Yeah.
So really, at this point, anything could happen. It's just a matter of players getting in the playtime with the decks and seeing what, like, solidifying the shells, what's working best, what's not. And the meta is always constantly shifting anyways, because you have cycles where you had, like, the mono blue tempo was good against the mono red, so the mono red started flying out so mono blue tempo could come in, and then, you know, mono red got this piece and that piece, and then you see mono blue tempo tied down, or you see other decks take over. And it's just a matter of prepping for them.
That is the sign of a really healthy standard.
I do believe you are correct in saying that, yes.
Like, if it's constantly moving, that means it's healthy.
Yeah, it's constantly moving. There's so many pieces you could play that have the potential to be amazing. Like I said, we're just starting to see some of these 36 Planeswalkers that were just printed evolve into these decks and turn them into, like, other things and make them better. Or, you know, we're seeing the Esper Hero shell emerge, like, from the pulling out of the Esper Control and, like, pulling up from the Mardu Hero deck. You're starting to see Esper Hero become its own thing. So I think this is gonna, the next 3 months in particular, and potentially beyond, but the next 3 months are, I think, gonna be really fun.
Yeah, and honestly, we're probably not gonna see like a concrete meta, probably till after the Pro Tour when a whole bunch of decks pop out from that event.
When the next standard Pro Tour, because we had a Pro Tour, it was just Modern.
Yeah. So
probably when you see the next arena.
Yeah.
The Mythic Arena Championship.
The Mythic Championship. Yep. Yeah. Hopefully they do not do Duo Standard. That confused me.
Oh, that was rough. That was really rough. There were a lot of people that complained about that format, but we'll have to see what happens. I think it's going to be just a fun time, and it's super healthy. You can build and play whatever you want. Just be aware that, you know, like we said, the decks that are the tier 1 decks right now, you're probably going to see quite a bit of them. So just keep that in mind when you're building your sideboard, but have fun building whatever you want.
Absolutely. So next week.
Yeah, what we got on the plate for next week?
We are going over standard deck techs. I think Haley and I are each going to do, what, two?
We're each going to do 2. We're gonna take our own stab at this standard game and see if we can't create...
Spoiler.
The next big deck.
Spoiler. My deck tech will probably rock my world.
Spoiler. My decks probably aren't going to rock anybody's world but my own. So we're going to take a crack at that, and we'll see how those do, and we'll build them with this cute little meta that's going on right now in mind.
They're probably both going to be jank, so just be prepared for that.
Excuse you.
I'm expecting jank from you.
Excuse you. I did not just build jank.
You build a lot of jank, yeah.
I build a lot of jank. But jank is so fun to play.
It is fun. It's absolutely
in the standard
fun.
Where if I'm going to build jank, now's the time to build
Absolutely.
jank.
So, statement from Move to Combat. Guys, build all the jank. Just do it. Just flood the meta with jank.
Flood the meta so hardcore with jank. Just do it for us.
What?
It'll make everything so much more fun.
Alright, well, this was Move to Combat. You can match us every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can tweet us at @tocombat, or you can find us here at Twitch TV/Move to Combat. You can email us at movetocombatpodcast@gmail.com. If you like our intro, what's up?
I'm sorry. I wasn't laughing at you. I apologize.
It's okay. We were all like giggly. I don't know why. But anyway, if you liked our intro or outro music, you can check it out at soundcloud.com/James Shibe. That's James SHAIEB. That's me. Features vocals from local rapper Ron Bilas. And if you like role-playing games, you can check out our sister podcast, Brave Yet Stupid, on Saturdays at 6:30 p.m. at Twitch TV/Brave Yet Stupid. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.
Bye, guys.
Have a good one.